The sterile scent of antiseptic always reminds me of that day. My mother, Eleanor, lay still in the hospital bed, a fragile bird tangled in a nest of tubes. I'm Daniel Sterling, an estate lawyer in Boston, ironically. I'd spent my career resolving family disputes, yet here I was, trapped in my own. My sister, Sarah, was already scrolling through real estate apps. "A place in the Cotswolds would be lovely," she whispered. My brother Mark scoffed. "Don't spend it all, Sarah. I need at least $200,000 to clear my debts." They were vultures, carving up her £700,000 estate before she was even gone. What they didn't see, what only I noticed, was the single tear that escaped my mother's eye. She heard it all. That tear wasn't just sadness. It was a verdict. Sarah, my younger sister, has always lived a life she couldn't afford. A life funded by a string of wealthy exes, and of course, a constant stream of loans from Mom. The Cotswolds cottage was just the next prop for her carefully curated Instagram feed. She caught my glare and shrugged. "What? It's just practical planning, Daniel." Then there's Mark, our older brother, the prodigal son who never returned. 2 failed startups and a portfolio of bad bets had left him with a mountain of debt and a bottomless sense of entitlement. He saw Mom's money not as a gift, but as a long overdue bailout. "Practical?" he sneered at Sarah. "You call blowing a third of it on a vacation home practical?" They were so lost in their venom they didn't see Mom's fingers weakly curl around my own. They never saw the real things. I was the one who managed her appointments, paid her bills, held her hand through the chemo. I was also the executor of her will, a detail they conveniently ignored. And as I felt that faint squeeze, a cold, hard certainty settled in my gut. This wasn't just a fight, it was an execution. My mother wasn't a fool. Her love was just boundless. A deep, clear well that Sarah and Mark had been methodically draining their entire lives. I remember my dad, Richard, before he passed, trying to turn off the tap. We were at his 60th birthday dinner. Mark had just torched £50,000 on a revolutionary venture importing bespoke coffee beans from a remote Peruvian village that, it turned out, didn't exist. "Eleanor, you're crippling him," Dad had said, his voice tight with a frustration I knew all too well. "He needs to feel the sting of failure to ever succeed." Mark, ever the victim, slammed his fork down. "You just don't believe in me. You never have." And Mom, as always, swept in to be the peacemaker. "Now, Richard, he's trying his best. We have to support our children." She co-signed a loan for him the very next day. To her, support meant a blank check and a blind eye. Sarah was just a different brand of predator. Her weapon wasn't reckless ambition. It was carefully crafted crisis. The tuition for a marketing degree that mysteriously morphed into a 6-month wellness retreat in Bali. The deposit for a flat she desperately needed to escape a toxic landlord, only for me to discover she'd trashed her previous apartment and forfeited the security deposit. Each disaster was a stage play, and Mom was her most devoted audience member, always ready with a standing ovation of cash. "Daniel just doesn't get it, Mom," she'd sob over the phone, a performance I'd overheard a dozen times. "He's always been so stable. He doesn't know what it's like to feel things so deeply." She was right. I didn't know what it was like to manufacture emotions to manipulate the person who loved you most. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through law school. I watched them treat our parents' life savings like a personal slush fund while I was building my firm brick by painful brick. I tried to warn Mom, gently at first, then with the blunt force of legal logic. I showed her the bank statements, the endless cycle of debt and bailout. She'd just pat my hand, a sad smile on her face. "They're your brother and sister, Daniel. Family helps family." But this wasn't help. It was a slow poisoning. For years, they had convinced her that their constant, desperate need was a form of love, and that my quiet independence was a form of coldness. They'd successfully painted me as the unfeeling accountant of the family, the one who counted the pennies while they chased their beautiful, expensive dreams. Lying in that hospital bed, hearing their voices slice through the beeping of the machines, she finally saw it all for what it was. The dreams they were chasing were hers. And that faint pressure on my hand wasn't just a squeeze of affection, it was a transfer of power. Mom was finally giving me permission to do what Dad never could. She was closing the account. She passed an hour later. The final steady tone of the heart monitor was a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. Sarah managed a single, theatrical sob before subtly checking her reflection in the dark hospital window. Mark just cleared his throat. "So," he said, his voice devoid of anything but business. "What happens now, Daniel, with the will?" I looked from their impatient faces to my mother's peaceful one. "First," I said, my voice like ice, "we have a funeral." They played their parts perfectly. Mark gave a halting, insincere eulogy about her generosity, while Sarah wept into a silk handkerchief, ensuring the funeral photographer captured her good side. But the moment the last casserole dish was cleared from my mother's house, they were on me. "Have you called the solicitor?" Sarah asked, already pulling a designer catalog from her purse. "We need to get probate started. The Cotswolds market is heating up." I let them stew for a week. Then I summoned them not to the family home, but to my office. My turf. They sat opposite me at the polished mahogany conference table of Northgate Trust and Estate, looking small and out of place. They thought this was a formality, the simple reading of a will that would make them rich. I let them believe it for a few more minutes. I slid 2 folders across the table, one for each of them. As executor, my first duty is to the estate. I began, my voice the calm, measured tone I used with my most difficult clients. That means gathering all assets and settling all debts before any distribution can occur. Mark leaned forward, his greed a palpable thing. "Right, her debts. The mortgage is paid off, so what's left? A few credit cards?" "I'm not talking about debts the estate hoards," I clarified, letting the silence hang in the air. "I'm talking about debts owed to the estate." Sarah frowned, her perfectly plucked eyebrows knitting together. "What are you talking about? Mom didn't lend money to anyone." "Except..." Her voice trailed off as the penny began its slow, terrifying drop. I opened my own file, a prop for the performance. Mom was meticulous in her final years. This was the first stone in the avalanche. A lie, but a necessary one. She kept detailed records. She documented every significant financial transfer she made to both of you. She didn't see them as gifts. She legally designated them as advancements against your inheritance. I let that legal term, advancements, settle over them like a shroud. I saw the flicker of panic in Sarah's eyes, the flush of angry confusion on Mark's face. "That's ridiculous," Mark blustered, his voice rising. "Those were gifts." She wanted to help her children. "The probate court may not see it that way," I said smoothly, "which is why we need to be thorough, to protect the integrity of her final wishes." I pushed a pen towards each of them. "Inside your folders is a form. I need you to list, to the best of your ability, every sum of money you received. The Bali retreat, the seed money for the coffee business, the down payments, the bailed-out credit cards, everything. We'll cross-reference your lists with Mom's ledgers to create a final accounting." Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the folder. "Ledgers? What ledgers?" I leaned back in my chair, holding their panicked gaze, savoring the moment. The execution had begun. The ones she asked me to secure from her safe deposit box. The ones she updated right after she heard you planning her funeral from her hospital bed. The silence in the room was a weapon. Mark found his voice first, a strangled laugh that held no humor. "Ledgers? Don't be absurd, Daniel. Mom couldn't balance a checkbook. This is you. This is some sick lawyer trick." Sarah, ever the strategist, chimed in, her voice sharp. "He's right. There's no legal basis for this. Gifts are gifts. We'll get our own solicitor. You can't just invent debts." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached into my briefcase and placed 2 slim, leather-bound books on the mahogany table. They were old, the kind with marbled end papers and faded gold lettering on the spine. I'd spent a week aging them, staining the pages with tea, meticulously forging my mother's elegant, looping handwriting from old birthday cards. "Mom started these after Dad passed," I said, my voice quiet. She felt things were getting unbalanced. She wanted everything to be fair in the end. I opened the first book to a page marked with a red ribbon. "Mark, let's start with you. May 2015, seed capital for Peruvian coffee venture, £50,000. I turned a few more pages. August 2017, clear gambling debts, 32,000. January 2019, bailout for the app startup, 75,000. I slid the book towards him. His face was ashen. Then I opened the second ledger. Sarah, March 2016, 6-month Bali wellness experience, £40,000. Her gasp was audible. October 2018, deposit and first 6 months. Rent for Mayfair apartment, 60,000. It goes on. Jewelry, cars, designer handbags. Mom listed them all. She even noted when you told her they were investments. I closed the books with a soft, final thud. The legal term is advancement. It's a prepayment of an expected inheritance. As executor, I am legally bound to bring these advancements into hodgepodge. I let the archaic legal term hang in the air, a piece of jargon designed to intimidate. It means we add the value of the advancements back into the total estate before dividing it. It's a standard procedure to ensure equal distribution among beneficiaries. Mark just stared at the ledger, his bravado gone. Sarah was doing the math in her head, her face a mask of dawning horror. "Based on these ledgers," I continued, my tone flat and professional, "Mark, you've received advancements totaling approximately £310,000. Sarah, yours come to £285,000. I let them process the numbers. The total estate was £700,000. Divided 3 ways, that's roughly £233,000 each. The trap was sprung. Sarah looked up, her voice a tiny whisper. What does that mean, Daniel?" I looked her dead in the eye, my face devoid of all emotion. "It means, according to our mother's final wishes, you've both already had your share. In fact, you've had more. You're not getting another penny." The silence shattered. Mark's fist slammed down on the mahogany, making the leather-bound books jump. "You lying bastard!" he roared, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. "You cooked these up! Mom would never do this, never!" Sarah shot to her feet, her voice a venomous hiss. "This is illegal, Daniel. This is fraud. I'm calling my solicitor. We'll see you in court. We'll drain every last penny from this estate in legal fees before we let you steal it." I didn't flinch. I let their fury wash over me, a predictable storm I had long since prepared for. I calmly folded my hands on the table. "Go ahead," I said, my voice level. "Hire a solicitor. File a challenge. Let's drag this all into the public record." I turned to Mark. "Let's have a judge listen to the story of your 2 failed companies, funded entirely by a pensioner. Let's subpoena your bank records, your credit card statements, your betting history. Let's put your entire financial life under a microscope and ask the court who seems more credible." Then I looked at Sarah. "And you. Let's discuss your series of 6-month leases in apartments you couldn't afford. Let's talk about the loans for career courses that became luxury holidays. A protracted legal battle means full disclosure. Your carefully curated image of the struggling artist will be replaced by the reality of a 40-year-old woman who has systematically bled her mother dry. Is that a narrative you want broadcast in open court?" Their righteous anger began to curdle into something else, fear. They knew I was right. Their lives were houses of cards, and I was threatening to turn on a hurricane force fan. A court case wasn't a risk. It was a certainty of total exposure. "You have no proof," Mark mumbled, but the conviction had vanished from his voice. "I have a lifetime of proof," I countered softly. "And I have these." I tapped the ledgers. "My word as executor against yours. Who do you think the court will believe?" They stood there, trapped between their greed and the terrifying prospect of public humiliation. I saw the gears turning in their heads, the frantic calculation. This was the moment I'd waited for, the moment to tighten the screw. I leaned forward, my tone shifting from adversarial to something far more dangerous. Reasonable. "But I don't want that," I said, and they both looked up, clinging to the sliver of hope I was offering. "I don't want to tarnish Mom's memory with a sordid family squabble. I'm the executor. My job is to settle the estate as cleanly and efficiently as possible. So I'm prepared to offer you a way out. A settlement." Mark scoffed, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "A settlement? What are you going to offer us, 10 grand each to shut up and go away?" "Something far more valuable," I replied. I reached into my briefcase again and pulled out another 2 files, thinner this time, and placed them precisely in front of each of them. "As you both know, your financial situations have been precarious for some time, so precarious, in fact, that in the last 2 years, no bank would extend you further credit, not without a guarantor." A new kind of dread, cold and unfamiliar, crept into their eyes. They hadn't seen this coming. "Mom was worried sick," I continued, weaving the next part of my tapestry. "She couldn't bear the thought of you losing your apartment, Sarah, or you, Mark, having your car repossessed. Her own assets were tied up. So she came to me. She asked me to co-sign." Sarah's hand went to her mouth. Mark just stared at me, his jaw slack. "That's right," I said, confirming their silent, horrified questions. "The £30,000 loan you took out last year to consolidate your credit cards, Mark? That was guaranteed by my home. The lease on your Range Rover, Sarah? My signature's on that too. For the last 18 months, I have been your financial backstop, your safety net." I let the weight of that sink in. The money they thought they'd squeezed from the system was actually tethered to me. One of Mom's final acts, a private directive to me as her executor, was to settle these debts from the estate before any distribution. She wanted the books cleared, so last week I did exactly that. I paid them. In full. The car loan, the personal loan, the outstanding credit lines, all of it. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was screaming. "The thing about paying someone else's debt," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "is that the debt doesn't simply disappear, it just transfers. The debt is now owed to me." I tapped the new folders. "Inside you'll find the official transfer of debt notices from the lenders. Mark, you owe me £42,000. Sarah, you owe me 55. These are not family loans. These are legally binding commercial debts, and I am now your creditor." Their faces were a portrait of utter ruin. They had walked in here expecting a windfall, and were walking out with nothing but a new, ruthless lender. "But, as I said," I continued, pressing my advantage, "I want to settle this. I want to honor Mom by closing this chapter cleanly." I slid 2 single-page documents and a pen across the table. "This is a deed of renunciation. You sign it, you walk away from any and all claims to the estate, forever. You accept that your advancements and debts cancel out any inheritance. In return, I will sign this." I held up a second document. "A deed of forgiveness. I will write off every penny you owe me, personally. The debt will be gone." The choice was brutal. Option A: fight me in court, lose, get nothing from the estate, be publicly shamed, and still be on the hook to me for tens of thousands of pounds. Option B: sign the paper, get nothing from the estate, but walk away with their personal debts wiped clean. A fresh start, bought at the price of their pride and greed. It was a lifeline and a death sentence, all in one. I had taken their inheritance, and now I was going to make them thank me for it. I stood up. "I'll give you 2 the room to discuss it." I walked to the door, my back to them. "Take all the time you need." I didn't go far. I just stood in the hushed corridor outside, my reflection a faint ghost in the polished glass. I could hear them through the heavy oak door. Not words, just the frantic, muffled cadence of their argument. Mark's voice was a low, angry growl, punctuated by Sarah's higher, sharper retorts. It was the sound of a dying dynasty, two spoiled monarchs fighting over the ashes of a fallen kingdom. It lasted precisely 7 minutes. I counted. The door opened. It was Sarah who stood there, her face pale, her composure fractured. Mark was behind her, slumped in his chair, staring at the grain of the mahogany table as if it held the answers to his ruin. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "We'll sign?" Sarah said, her voice brittle. It was not a negotiation. It was a surrender. I walked back in and stood at the head of the table, the judge returning to a silent courtroom. I pushed the deeds of renunciation back to the center. "Use my pen," I said. Sarah's signature was a tight, angry scrawl. She slid the document across the table with a flick of her wrist, a final, futile act of defiance. Mark didn't even look at the paper. He just grabbed the pen, slashed his name across the bottom line, and threw it down. The click it made in the silent room was as loud as a gunshot. Their claims were severed. The inheritance was mine to control. I picked up the 2 signed deeds, folded them neatly, and placed them in my briefcase. Then, as promised, I took out the deeds of forgiveness for their personal debts, signed them both with a flourish, and handed one to each of them. "There," I said. "You're free and clear, a fresh start." Mark let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "A fresh start with nothing. You've taken everything, Daniel. I hope you enjoy Mom's money." I looked from his hateful glare to Sarah's exhausted resignation. They still didn't get it. They thought my revenge was about the money. "I won't enjoy a penny of it," I said calmly, snapping my briefcase shut, "because I'm not keeping it." They both stared at me, their minds struggling to process a motive beyond pure greed. "There's one last detail," I said, allowing myself the smallest, coldest of smiles. "About the ledgers. Mark, you were right. Mom never kept any. She couldn't balance a checkbook. Her handwriting was beautiful, but I got quite good at forging it over the last week." Sarah's mouth fell open. Mark's eyes widened in disbelief. "It was a bluff," I stated plainly. "A legally plausible fiction built on a lifetime of truth. The concept of advancements against inheritance is real, but proving it without documentation would have been a nightmare. You would have fought. You would have dragged her memory through the mud for years, draining the estate with legal fees until there was nothing left. I couldn't allow that. So I created a story you would believe. A story that used your own greed against you." You faked them?" Sarah whispered, horrified. "I created the evidence needed to ensure our mother's true final wish was carried out," I corrected her. "A wish she made perfectly clear to me in that hospital room, right after she heard you talking about Cotswold's cottages and clearing your debts." I let the memory of that moment hang in the air. The tear on my mother's cheek. The squeeze of her hand. "She couldn't speak," I said, my voice softening for the first time. "But she looked at me. And in her eyes, I saw so much regret. Not for loving you, but for how she'd done it. She knew she had enabled you, crippled you with her generosity. She knew that giving you this money would be the final, irreversible mistake. It wouldn't save you, it would just be more fuel for your fires." I paused, looking at the 2 people I once called family. Her squeeze, that last message, wasn't about giving the money to me. It was about making sure it never got to you. I walked to the window and looked out over the Boston skyline. "So, as executor, I will be honoring her final, unspoken directive. The entire £700,000 estate, every last penny, is being donated to establish the Eleanor Sterling Palliative Care Wing at the very hospital where she spent her last days. Her legacy won't be a vacation home or a bailed-out business. It will be comfort for the dying. It will be peace for families who actually care." I turned back to them. They were statues carved from disbelief. "So no, I didn't steal your inheritance," I said, delivering the final, killing blow. "I just made sure you gave it away. By signing those papers, you have officially renounced your claim, clearing the way for the estate to be liquidated and transferred. You haven't just been disinherited. You've just made the single largest charitable donation of your lives." The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Mark stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. The rage had been burned out of him, replaced by a hollow, vacant shock. Sarah sank back into her chair, her hands limp in her lap. The strategist, the manipulator, was finally and utterly checkmated. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking through me, at the smoldering ruins of her future. A wing?" she finally stammered. The grand scale of it, the permanence, was a concept her selfish world couldn't contain. "Our money for a hospital wing?" "Mom's money," I corrected, my voice soft but unyielding. "And yes, it turns out £700,000 goes a long way towards building something that actually matters. They're planning a small garden for the patients. They're going to call it Eleanor's Garden." That was the final twist of the knife. Not just the loss of the money, but its transformation into something selfless, something beautiful, something bearing her name. It was an act of grace they could never comprehend and a public monument to the generosity they had tried to exploit. It was a legacy they could see but never touch. Mark finally found his voice, a raw, wounded sound. "She would have wanted us to be happy." It was the same tired line he'd used his entire life, the ultimate justification for his endless taking. But the words were hollow now, stripped of their power. I didn't even feel anger anymore, just a vast, empty pity. "She did," I agreed, walking towards the door. "And I've just given you the only chance you'll ever have at it. A clean slate, no debts, no expectations, just yourselves. I wonder what you'll do with it." I didn't wait for an answer. I opened the door and walked out, leaving them behind in the sterile silence of my conference room. I didn't look back. Walking down the long corridor, the weight of the last 47 years began to lift. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was a profound, aching peace. The account wasn't just closed. It was finally, truly, balanced. If you were the mom lying in that bed and heard everything they said, what would you do with the will?